I never thought a routine afternoon would turn into the most surreal confrontation of my life. But that's exactly what happened when HOA Karen showed up on my property, papers in hand and fury in her eyes. She stormed across my yard, making it clear from the moment she arrived that she considered me an intruder, someone who had no business living outside the neat, perfectly manicured bounds of her precious homeowners association. "You need to leave," she barked, "or I will see you in court." Her voice carried the kind of authority that only comes from years of bullying neighbors into submission. And the neighbors, of course, had already whispered stories of her relentless enforcement of rules that no one seemed to understand but everyone feared. I invited her to sit, oddly calm despite the tension, and handed her a glass of water. She glared at me as if my civility was some form of mockery. Then, she opened her folder and began reading through an astonishingly detailed list of alleged infractions, zoning violations, noise complaints, landscaping issues that were either non-existent or utterly trivial. I listened patiently, knowing that every word she uttered could either be used against her or, if I played my cards right, used to dismantle the very authority she wielded so arrogantly. Karen was confident, and she expected me to flinch, but I'd spent months researching the ins and outs of property law and HOA governance. I had discovered the fragile nature of her association, the loopholes hidden in its bylaws, and the errors that could bring it all crashing down. "Do you understand?" I asked, keeping my tone calm, "that your HOA is technically a private corporation? That its power over me is entirely dependent on legal compliance, and that compliance has not been met?" Her expression flickered between confusion and indignation. I continued, "The authority you wield here is not as solid as you believe. If I file the correct motions, I can challenge the HOA's legitimacy and, legally, dissolve it." The realization hit her slowly, her confidence beginning to falter as she realized she might have underestimated me. By the time I filed the legal documents, her threats and calls to her lawyer had no immediate effect. The filings had been accepted, and the court had scheduled a review date far sooner than she anticipated. It was ironic, almost poetic, how quickly her perceived control over the neighborhood began to crumble. While we waited for the hearing, she continued ranting about how much effort she had poured into building the HOA, her voice dripping with self-importance, while I simply documented every interaction and prepared for the court proceedings with meticulous attention to detail. I had discovered multiple critical errors in the HOA's incorporation documents, missing signatures, unfiled state-required documents, and procedural violations that made the association technically non-compliant. When the hearing day arrived, she walked in with her legal team looking confident, convinced that the courtroom would validate her authority. But she hadn't accounted for careful preparation and legal knowledge. I laid out every error, every procedural misstep, and every violation that rendered the HOA unable to enforce its own rules legally. I presented evidence showing that board elections had been improperly conducted and state-mandated filings ignored. Karen attempted to interject, but the judge reminded her that assertions without evidence were meaningless. The most shocking part of the hearing for her came when I calmly explained that the HOA had lost all legal standing and could not, therefore, enforce any of its rules or levy fines. She scoffed at the idea, claiming that her authority was moral as well as legal, but the judge was not swayed. Legal standing is determined by law, not by someone's sense of entitlement. It was almost astonishing to watch her slowly comprehend that the empire she had ruled with an iron fist could be undone with paperwork, precision, and understanding. Now, could one person really dissolve an entire HOA? It seems unbelievable, but the law is clear. Any association that fails to comply with its own bylaws and state regulations can be challenged and potentially dissolved. That question lingered in my mind as Karen's confidence visibly wilted in the courtroom. I had studied the rules, I had anticipated every objection, and I had armed myself with evidence that left no room for misinterpretation. When the judge finally ruled, the HOA was officially dissolved. Karen sat stunned, speechless for the first time in her life. Her legal threats, her social media posts boasting about power over residents, her constant intimidation, they all amounted to nothing. The court's decision rendered her authority null and void. I left the courtroom feeling a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction, not because I had outwitted her, but because justice had prevailed. The aftermath was both surreal and satisfying. Neighbors who had felt trapped under her micromanagement quietly thanked me, even if only in whispers. Karen retreated into private life, powerless, unable to bully or control anyone. The HOA she had built with so much pride no longer existed, not because of malice, but because the law allowed for accountability, and I had simply held her to it. As I returned to my property and looked out at the now-free neighborhood, a thought lingered in my mind. Are the greatest threats we face truly the people around us, or are they the systems we believe to be untouchable? Sometimes, it only takes one person with knowledge, patience, and determination to reveal the cracks in a system, to show that no power is absolute. And in that moment, living outside the rules Karen tried to enforce felt sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Freedom, I realized, is as much about understanding the law as it is about living outside someone else's perception of control.